Hey, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. It's Dave with you. We're talking intros and outros today. Good question came in through with a client I'm working with on their podcast. And as we go through this process of learning how to do a good intro and a good outro, one thing I put in front of them that I want to share with you is something I don't hear very often with all the other podcast gurus who podcast about podcasting. The whole idea about an intro and outro, I've got a little different take on it that I wanted to share with you. And I want you to see if you can try to put this into practice for your own podcast in your next episode. Real practical thing for you to try and kind of a mindset around intros and outros. Again, I don't hear this mentioned often, so let's share with you as I've been working with this client. And like I've said, I do help people with their podcast. If you need help, howtopodcast.ca. But let's talk intro and outros and a little bit different take on how you can plan yours for your show. So think of your podcast as a party, all right? When everybody arrives at your place or wherever the party's being held, you're the host. You're inviting people in, you're making sure they're comfortable, everybody's got a beverage or a snack or something, and you're the host, right? You're the one that's making this thing come together, and you want to make sure everybody has a great time. So you want to introduce your podcast, and when it's done, you want to make sure people leave going, that was awesome. So you're going to meet with them before they exit and head back to their vehicles or their cab, or you want to make sure that they've connected with you as a host. And as we create our podcast, I want you to think about your intros and outros in a new lens that I don't hear many people talk about. And simply being that I would love for you to consider your intro as something that's designed for a brand new listener that's never been here before, never pressed play. Somebody told them about your show. They searched you and found you on a listening app or YouTube or through Google. Somehow they've arrived at your podcast today, this week, this episode launching this week, and this is their first time here. Now you could have hundreds of episodes in the past that you've done, or this could be your very first episode. This applies to everybody. Okay, applies to you no matter how many episodes you have. Somebody's going to find your show this week, and they're going to come to you and to your show, and they don't know anything about you. They don't know anything about your podcast. So at a higher level, I just want you to think about this. If you kind of come to your intro for this episode that you're going to record this week, and you don't embrace a new listener, you might be alienating a new listener. In that, if you start off with things that you need context with, things you need to have heard the last 200 episodes or the last 10 episodes to kind of get what you're saying or understand the little jokes and the little inside behind the scenes things that a long-term listener will understand. A new listener will be in the dark. They won't even understand what you're talking about. And they don't know who you are. That's the other part. Your long-term listeners, they know you. And as a listener of podcasts, I have to explain how I do listening, and it might be different for you as a listener, but I generally skip most of the intros, especially if they're canned intros, meaning they're the same intro episode to episode to episode. Okay? I usually skip those. I just hit my fast forward a few times. The only time I won't do that is if my phone is in my pocket. I generally listen at work. So I'm listening from episode to episode, and I binge listen. So when I find a podcast I love, I just listen to all the episodes. I go back to the beginning and I hit play and I just go from episode to episode. My phone's in my pocket. I'm not looking at your show notes. I'm not looking at your title. I'm not kind of going through and picking the episodes I'm interested in. I'm interested in them all because I'm interested in you as a host. And I just listen episode to episode and just let them play. 8 hours straight during my shift, I listen to podcasts. So I'm not really interested in all that information, but if I do have my phone in my hand, I will skip through your intros if they're the same as every other episode, because, after you've heard 10 episodes, you kind of can do the intro on your own. As a listener, you can already tell what you're going to say. One thing that makes me not skip your intros is when you do a different intro from episode to episode. because I don't know what you're going to say next. So I don't want to skip that. So keep that in mind. So when you're looking at your podcast and your intro, I want you to think about how you can frame your intro for a new listener. Again, your long-term listeners might just skip through your intro altogether. So let's focus then on the listener who's brand new to your show. And how can we get them to hook into your show and go, this is the right podcast for me. I was looking for this topic and I found your show, and I'm at the point of deciding whether or not I'm going to stick with your show. I want to have something that hooks me in, so I put my phone away and enjoy your podcast. So the first thing I would love for you to do is try to hook your podcast listener from the start. We need to create an irresistible podcast intro for our show. What can you do to hook your audience? When I go fishing, I'm trying to use the best bait possible to catch the most fish that I can. So whatever that is, worms or minnows or bacon, corn, there's a lot of different things you can use to catch a fish. And you'll find that some things work sometimes, some things don't work at other times. Is it sunny? Is it overcast? Is it cloudy? Is it raining? Is it drizzly? Is it cold? Is it hot? Those all have an impact on fishing. So what you use, the bait has to change depending on the climate and what you're dealing with. I would challenge you to not just stick with one canned intro, one type of bait that you just use every time you record, because it can get stale over time and you might not catch as many fish and many listeners. So when you change things up, it's like a little pattern disrupt where we're used to hearing one thing and then you come out and do something different. It's like, wait a minute, hang on. That's different. And we'll stick and listen to your intro. But you need to do something that hooks that new listener. Don't forget, there's a new listener coming to your show this week for the first time, and you want to make them feel welcome. You want to help them understand what the show is about, and you want to try to bring them in and embrace them as a new listener, not necessarily ignoring your long-term listener, but focusing your attention on somebody new. How can you do that? Come up with some ideas, and I'd love to hear what you come up with. Your intro to your podcast is the gateway to your show. It's like your welcome mat at the front door of your house. It is the welcoming thing that brings people into your content and makes them feel comfortable. Just as a good host would do, you're going to welcome your guests, and that your guest is your listener. So this intro serves as an important part of your show, and I think it's something that we don't set and forget. It's something we need to be intentional about when we record our show, especially if we're doing something different, unique, special. That canned intro we've used 100 times, it might be time to refresh that. So I love when a podcaster records their intro in the moment, because it feels like they're talking to me as a listener, not like they've done something in advance, mass produced it, and just put it out there, slapped an intro and outro. It's the same episode to episode. Yeah, sometimes it gets a little boring, so I love when I can have a host talk to me on the new episode, and I feel like I'm hooked in. So the key elements to an effective intro, and I'll have all this information in the show notes, so please go check it out. No need to make notes, it's all there for you. But some key elements to an effective intro: an immediate hook, something that grabs their attention. Clear show identity. I really love this. State the name of the podcast name, the host. Again, if there's multiple voices on your show, I don't know who person A is and person B is. I don't know your relationship with each other. Are you co-workers? Are you family? Are you husband and wife? Are you partners? Are you father and child? I don't know the relationship. I'm new here. So anything you can do to kind of help me understand and acclimatize myself to the podcast is helpful. And give a concise overview. Kind of briefly explain the concept of the show, the value that you offer in this podcast. That, again, helps me realize if I'm in the right place. And then preview the episode. Tease some main topics. Or like I do on Living the Next Chapter, I have a clip from my guest that I play at the beginning, which kind of brings you into the conversation and gives you a new voice every episode. to kind of spark the interest for you to stick around. Tailor your podcast for new listeners, especially your intro. Make sure that you're using language that is not above your listener in that they haven't heard any of your other episodes before. So everything's new for them. It's all net new. So make sure you're using language that brings people into the content. Don't give them something where they have to figure out what that means, or acronyms, those letters that represent words. Sometimes people don't understand what's going on. So please explain in your intros so people feel more accommodated and welcomed into your show. And provide context for the podcast theme or the niche of your show. Who are we talking to, and who is a part of this community, so that I feel like I fit in with those that listen to the show as well. And maybe even establish your credibility. Mention your expertise or notable guests, or why you're doing this show and why the show matters to you. I want to connect with you as a host right from the beginning. Tailor your intros for new listeners. That needs to be your focus, I think. And I'd love for you to try it. If that's not your focus in your current intros, the next episode you do, I'd love for you to make it more focus on that new listener so they feel welcomed right from the beginning. So that's intros. I would say that your outros are more designed for your long-term subscribed, followed listeners who are there. They know you. They've been listening to your show for more than one episode. They've subscribed, they've followed, they're following you on social media, they're following on YouTube. These people already know before you tell them when your next episode's out. They already know. Maybe they've already listened to it. So you don't need to convince them to come. They're part of your community. They know you. And they're expecting your show, and they feel a bond with you already. You don't have to convince them. So when you do your outros, think about it this way. We talk about retention. Retention levels is how long a person listens to your show before they leave. Now, and we want to encourage listeners to listen to the end of our show, the whole thing. Again, that's a signal to any of the places you listen to your show, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all the places. If you go to a podcast and listen to the end, that catches the attention of that app. Why? Because they want people to stay on the app longer. And the longer you stay and the longer you can keep your audience to the very end of your episode, the better. The people who listen to the end of your episode, the entirety of your podcast episode, those are your long-term followers and listeners. The people that are there to kick their tires and to check out your show, they're not really convinced. They may come and leave before they get to the end of the show. Now, they won't hear your outro because they've already left. The people that hear the outros are the people who love your show. So I would say then, in comparison to intros where everybody's coming in and there's new people coming in and returning listeners, an outro is more focused on your community, more focused on the people who've stuck with you because they want to hear every part of your show. That's your community. So your outros need to be framed a little different than your intros. Intros is everyone. Outros are your community and your most rabid fans, the people who follow everything that you do. So focus on your community and your outro, and focus on your new listeners on your intro. Does that make sense? Your outros need to be engaging with your community. Your outro is your opportunity to connect with your loyal listeners and foster and deepen that relationship that you have with your podcast listener. In your outro, there's a few things you can include. Gratitude. Thank your listeners for all their support. Thank you for listening to the show to the very end. I hear people doing this, and it's great. That honors your listener who sticks to the end. Again, I would suggest try not to use canned outros on a regular basis, because people start to pick up on their just pre-recorded regular outros and they'll start skipping them. So maybe not do a canned outro all the time, maybe some of the time, but get in there and do a special outro for your listener as often as you can. Your call to action, and I'm going to do an episode around maybe changing the name of call to action to pathway to action or a path to action. And the reason I'm saying that is new episode coming out about this, but in general terms, a call to action is a marketing term. And, we're podcasters. So maybe we can change that up a little bit and make it a little less salesy and call to action. And it's a very popular term. So I'm fighting an uphill battle, even just bringing this up. But a path to action, I think, is a little bit less salesy and marketing speech. So anyways, a call to action or a path to action encourages engagement with your audience to do the next thing, whatever that is. Buy the book, support the author, check out your website, follow the show, go to my Buy Me a Coffee, leave me a SpeakPipe message. These are all things you're asking your audience to do. A small minority of your audience will actually respond, but keep asking. It's something your audience needs to hear, that you're looking for engagement for your show. So whatever your path or call to action is, you want to keep that in front of your audience and maybe change it up. Don't have the same call to action every episode because, again, it becomes repetitious and then people skip. They skip it and because they've heard it 1,000 times. Again, remember outro, we're still talking community. We're talking about people who follow the show. So these people know you and they know when you just do a copy of the last episode. Because again, like me, we're listening episode to episode back to back. We're hearing your intro, we're hearing your outro, episode to episode. And after a while, it gets pretty repetitive. Your outros are a great place to build community, mention ways to connect with you as a host. Again, for a non-podcaster, listening to a podcast, they don't understand the magic of podcasting. They don't know how busy you are, and if they can talk to you directly, you're kind of a star to them in the sense that they feel like they know you and they really do appreciate what you do. So they don't know if they can reach out and leave you a message and if you'll respond or not. They're kind of unsure because it's different than social media. And then maybe you could also use your outro as a teaser and you can preview upcoming content or send them back into the catalog and tell them about an episode they might not have heard about. Remember, intros are more for the new listener focused, and then outros are more focused on your community. What about your diehard fans? When you're talking to your diehard fans in the outro portion in comparison to the intro, you can use more familiar language and inside jokes. Again, because they're listening to the end of the show. They listen to you on a regular basis. They'll get familiar language and terms that you use and inside jokes. You can reference ongoing discussions or previous episodes. You can highlight listener contributions or feedback. It's a great place to put it at the end when you get a SpeakPipe message. I know we'd love to throw it at the front and have everybody hear it, but try putting it at the end. It becomes a feature, a thing that keeps people listening to the end of the show. Think about what you can do at the end. Maybe recommend a book, a podcast, a resource, your own coaching, something that you can offer or promote at the end of the show. Maybe promote another podcast. Have a commercial for some other show at the end of your podcast and make that an ongoing feature when people leave your show. Because when they're done listening to your show, if there's nothing new to listen to, they might want a recommendation from you on a show that you admire, and you can have a link and they can go right from your show to that show. That recommendation engine happens through word of mouth. So anything you could do to share a podcast you admire, then do that. Again, I go back to two of my favorite podcasters, Scarlett and JJ. At the end of JJ's show, JJ can recommend an episode of Scarlett's show. Scarlett, you can recommend an episode of JJ's show and have that as the end of your podcast. Send people where you want to send them, to yourself or to someone else that you admire, and give your listeners something more than just the episode they listen to. Try doing something different at the end of your podcast episodes. It's really kind of interesting when people do that. So when we compare intros and outros, let's talk about our primary audience. For our intros, our primary audience are new listeners. For the outro, our primary audience is loyal subscribers. That's the difference, okay? Intros, primary audience, new listeners. Outros, loyal subscribers. What about the tone? The intro of your podcast, the tone needs to be welcoming and explanatory. You have to be explaining the podcast. And the tone of the outro then can be more focused on familiarity, the community, and the people that listen to your show long term. See the difference? How about the length? For your intro, the length of your intro needs to be typically shorter and more focused. And the length of your outro, again, because this is long-term listeners, can be slightly longer and more conversational. So keep that in mind. See the difference between an intro and outro? And lastly, the content focus for your intro needs to be the show concept, a preview of the episode, an overview of what we're going to do here. That's really important. The outro, in comparison, needs to be more engagement and future content focused. That's the difference. Now, you're like, wow, this is a lot of stuff, Dave. It's all in the show notes. You can follow along and take a look at it. You can always re-listen to this. It does help if you want to go back and listen to it again. But I really want you to be very focused and grab a piece of paper and a pen or whatever you're going to use. And I want you to think about how you can go through your podcast and make your intro, again, more focused on new listeners and make your outro more focused on your loyal subscribers. By tailoring your intro to newcomers and your outro to established listeners, you create a well-rounded podcast structure that serves both groups effectively. This approach is going to help you attract new listeners and, at the same time, nurture the dedicated community of fans who return to your podcast episode after episode after episode. This is your plan, and I'd love for you to put it into practice, and I'd love to get your feedback on how you have altered or changed or adjusted your intro to new listeners and your outro to your loyal subscribers, and what have you seen? Have you seen an uptick in the length of time that people listen to your show? Have you seen that you're getting more people sticking around to your podcast because they feel welcomed and they feel included right from the beginning? I'd love to hear your success stories, and it may take a few episodes for this to happen, but I'd love to hear your stories and what's going to happen. Oh, and before I go, I have a small little rant to share with you. Are you ready for this? Okay, a little rant. It's coming up in 3, 2, 1.
And now, it is time for Dave to share a most excellent rant on something that he just won't stop talking about. Please allow Dave to share his thoughts on this particular subject so that his glorious wife Jennifer may have a moment of rest from Dave going on and on about this topic. Here is Dave and his rant for this week.
Okay, so here's my rant to end off the podcast. Here's something I would really love to see you stop doing in your show. Okay, please stop doing this. And here's why. Again, I told you, when I press play on your podcast, I listen episode to episode to episode. So I'm listening to your show multiple episodes in a row. And what's really frustrating is when you have the exact same intro that you have as an outro. Because guess what? I get to hear it twice as we go from episode to episode. Actually, 4 times. It's just constant. It's the same thing. When you have the same call to action, the same intro, the same outro, you've done the exact same recording for your intro and outro. What happens is when I go from your one episode to the next one, I hear your intro, which is exactly the same as your outro, and then the next episode is the intro again. So I get back to back the exact same thing. And it is so frustrating because I don't need to hear it that many times. And it seems to be a little bit lazy. So I would love for you to not do that and do something that honors people who fall in love with your show, because it is so frustrating to hear your same intro and outro repeated again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Okay? It's a little rant. That's it. I just want you to do something creative, unique, and don't put your podcast on autopilot. Do something special for your guests. Do something special for your listeners. Do something unique in your show that keeps people coming back. Don't give your listeners one single reason to skip, stop, or move away from your show. Be creative, do your best, and if you have any questions about your podcast, anything at all, there's a link in the show notes. It's a special link just for you. It's only for listeners to the podcast. This is my outro, focused on community, focused on you that have listened to many more episodes than the others. This is only for you. In the show notes, a calendar link for you where we can get together and talk about your show. Ask me anything. You can use it many times. It's all free. It doesn't cost a penny. I'd love to meet with you, talk about your show, and answer any questions you have. People are responding. People are using the link, and it makes me so happy. The big thing, I want to hear your voice. I want to meet you. And I want to make the best podcast about podcasting that serves you and helps you grow your show. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is by talking to you. So please reach out. I don't bite. I'd love to meet you. And I'd love to have you part of this community. howtopodcast.ca. There's all the information there for you. And the links in the show notes to have time in my calendar. Just you and me. Okay? Bring your questions. Bring your comments, your suggestions. Let's meet. I'd love to meet you. Thank you for being here. I look forward to hearing your intro and outro, how you've adjusted, how you've changed it up a little bit. And I'd love to hear the results. Anytime, leave a comment on the podcast or reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thanks for being part of the community. Thank you for listening to the very end. You are amazing. Take care. Keep podcasting. So you're a podcaster and you podcast alone. You are in your home, you're in your studio, you're in your closet, and you podcast. And you put everything out there in the world and you're thinking, man, I'd love to meet another podcaster and not feel so alone. I wish there was a way to meet up with other podcasters and talk about my journey, ask my questions in a safe place where others there are also podcasters at different levels. Some people have been doing this a long time. Maybe some podcasters are brand new like me. And I'd love to be able to ask questions and do community with others. Maybe find a guest for my show or be a guest and ask a question that's bothering me about podcasting that I haven't seen or already got an answer to. I wish there was a group for me. Dave, do you know of a group where they do all of that and they do group hugs, virtual group hugs? Yeah, we do. It's our meetup. And you know, guess what? You're invited to come to our meetups. They are amazing. Not because of me by any stretch of imagination. It's because they're great because of the people who show up. You're going to meet some of the nicest podcasters you've ever met. There's no judgment. There's no talking down to you. It's not about me. It's about the group. And there's many times where I don't even have to talk. Each of the people coming bring great expertise and insights that can help you grow your show, to help you be a better person. And they're there to support you. It's our meetups, and you can find them at our howtopodcast.ca website. Come join us. There's over 200 people in our group, and we'd love to have you there. Lots of room for you. Come be a part of our meetups and meet other podcasters. Don't do it alone. Podcasting should never be done alone. Come join us. howtopodcast.ca. See you at our meetups.